The village of Falkenrue was the kind of place where days passed slowly, like wind through old trees. Tom didn't rush there, it walked, and Johann Weber had long since stopped trying to catch it. Every morning, he rose at the same hour, drank black coffee from the same chipped mug, and walked the same path through the orchard his wife had once loved. The apple trees were quiet companions now, branches gnarled, leaves whispering memories he no longer spoke aloud. It had been 7 years since Marta died. 7 years since laughter had echoed in the kitchen or warm bread had filled the air. Johann still kept her blue scarf hanging by the back door. He didn't wear it. He just couldn't move it. On Tuesdays, he went into town for supplies. Not because he needed them urgently, but because it gave structure to his silence. That particular Tuesday was like the others, gray sky, the weight of damp air, boots crunching gravel. He handed a few coins to the baker, nodded politely to the pharmacist, and made his way toward the town square. Then he heard it, a voice, soft, untrained, but full of something raw and aching, floating down from a window above the small grocery. A song, not a pop song, not anything modern. It sounded like a lullaby from somewhere far away, sung in a language Johann didn't recognize. But the pain in it that needed no translation. He froze. People passed by, carts rattled, children shouted across the cobblestones. But Johann just stood there, eyes fixed on the second-story window. It was slightly open, the curtain shifting gently. He couldn't see who sang. Only the song reached him, weaving through the noise like smoke. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed felt sharper than the sound itself. Johann swallowed hard and moved on, but something in him had shifted. It wasn't just a song. It was a sound of someone alone in the world. A voice not trying to be heard, but unable to stay silent. Back on his farm that evening, Johann found himself restless. He boiled water for tea, then forgot to drink it. He sat on the bench near the orchard, staring at the soil as if it might offer answers. Who was she? He muttered aloud, surprised by the sound of his own voice. The trees didn't answer, but the melody lingered in his mind, like a seed planted by accident, waiting unseen for the right moment to grow. Her name was Lilia, though she rarely said it out loud. Most people didn't ask. The man she lived with just called her girl, or worse, depending on his mood. She'd met him through someone at a shelter months ago, someone who said he could offer her a place to stay, a job, protection. It hadn't taken long for the promises to rot. He wasn't violent, not in the way that left bruises, but he watched her like he owned her. He dictated when she left the house, what she wore, and who she spoke to. He didn't hit, but he controlled. With words, with silence, with hunger. Sometimes, when he was gone, Lilia sang, just quietly by the window, songs her grandmother had hummed in a language half forgotten. Songs that reminded her of soft blankets, distant voices, and hands that didn't hurt. She didn't know anyone was listening. That afternoon, she sat on the edge of the cold metal bench by the village bus stop. Her coat was too thin for late autumn, and her backpack rested between her boots, half unzipped and mostly empty. She didn't know where she was going. She just wanted to be away. Johann Weber had no reason to pass that bench. His errands were already done, but something pulled him down the side street behind the square. Maybe curiosity, maybe something older and deeper. He recognized her instantly. Not her face. It was drawn tight and wary, but her posture, the way she stared ahead as if bracing for the world to strike. And when a gust of wind blew her hair back, revealing a high cheekbone and a sliver of sorrow in her eyes, he knew. It was the voice from the window. He slowed his steps, not wanting to frighten her. "The buses don't run past 6, he said gently. She turned slightly, guarded. "I know. Waiting for someone?" "No." He nodded, standing in silence. The street was empty except for them. After a pause, he said, "I heard you singing yesterday. You have a voice that makes a man stop walking." Her brow creased. "I didn't mean for anyone to hear." "That's the kind that matters most," Johann said. She looked down at her bag. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but something else, something like fear, or maybe the memory of it. Johann took a careful step closer. "I live outside the village. Apple Farm. Quiet place. I could use help with the trees." She didn't answer right away, But she didn't say no either. Johann wasn't the kind of man who made quick decisions. He measured his words like seeds in a planting trough, deliberate, precise, knowing some would never sprout. But when he saw the girl's thin shoulders hunched against the wind, when he heard the silence that followed her every step, he didn't have to think. He simply said, "If you need somewhere warm, my farm isn't far. Just for a night or two. You'd have your own room." Lilia didn't answer right away. Her eyes narrowed, and Johann saw it clearly. The calculation, the fear, the practiced distrust of someone who had been offered help before, but paid dearly for it. "I'm not looking for anything," he added quickly. "Just offering space. And maybe a hot drink." Still she hesitated. He didn't push. The sky was darkening, and the bus shelter was no place to sleep. Her backpack, he now saw, was little more than a bundle of cloth with some threadbare clothes inside. No money, no food. Her boots were damp. "I can help with apples or something," she mumbled finally, eyes fixed on the ground. "That would be appreciated," Johann replied with a quiet nod. "We'll take the back path. It's quieter." They walked side by side, not speaking. The forest trail behind the village was soft with leaves. Branches creaked in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped. Johann didn't offer small talk. He let the silence carry them, trusting it to do more than questions ever could. When they reached the farmhouse, dusk had settled. It was a plain house, 2 stories, whitewashed long ago and weather-worn. A small orchard stretched behind it, dark trees swaying. Smoke rose from the chimney. He'd lit the stove that morning. Inside, the kitchen was warm and simple. A kettle hissed gently. He gestured to a chair at the heavy wooden table, and she sat stiffly, arms crossed. "Tea?" he asked. She nodded. He poured 2 mugs, pushed one toward her, then busied himself with a loaf of rye bread and a jar of pear jam. No questions, no staring, just the slow, honest rhythm of someone who had nothing to prove. Lilia wrapped her hands around the mug like it was a secret she might lose. She didn't sip right away. Her eyes moved around the room. The shelf of dusty books, the faded photo of a woman on the wall, the knitted scarf still hanging by the door. She looked at Johann then. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. He didn't look up from slicing bread. "Because everyone should have a place to sit when they're tired." That was all. And somehow it was enough for now. The morning air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Mist clung to the low branches like threads of memory, and the orchard behind Johann's house stretched in neat, crooked rows, each tree old enough to have seen lifetimes pass. Lilia stepped outside quietly, the mug he'd given her still warm in her hands. She hadn't slept much, but the silence of the farmhouse had been different than what she knew. Not heavy with fear, but gentle. Waiting, like the space respected her presence, rather than questioning it. She watched Johann from a distance. He moved slowly between the trees, pruning shears in one hand, the other brushing along bark like a man greeting old friends. He stopped now and then to inspect the branches, cutting carefully, never rushing. After a while, he glanced back and noticed her standing there. "Walk with me," he asked. Lilia hesitated, then nodded and stepped into the rows of trees. The ground was soft with fallen leaves, the kind that didn't crunch, only whispered. She fell in a step beside him. "This one's sick," he said, pausing beside a particularly knotted tree. The bark was cracked, some of the limbs limp and bare. "She stopped blooming 2 seasons ago, but I'm not giving up yet." "She?" Lilia asked. He smiled slightly. "All my trees have moods. This one, stubborn as a mule." He handed her the pruning shears. "Here, cut just above the bud. Clean and smooth. Sharp but gentle." Lilia took them carefully, like holding something that might break if handled wrong. Her hands were steady, but her breath caught as she cut. "Not bad," Johann said. "Wounds like this can heal, but only if they're made right." She looked at the branch she'd trimmed. Sap glistened at the cut, clear, quiet, alive. They moved from tree to tree, Johann showing her how to see what each needed, what to keep, what to let go. Sometimes he spoke, but mostly they worked in silence. Lilia's hands, so often clenched, began to relax. She brushed leaves aside without thinking, bent to lift fallen apples and wipe them clean. As the sun rose higher, It broke through the mist, casting golden light over the orchard. Lilia squinted up at it. Her face, usually guarded, softened for a moment. Johann watched from a few steps away. He didn't say it aloud, but he saw it, just a flicker. Something in her had started to reach for the light. The old house creaked in the night, but it wasn't an unsettling sound. It was the sound of remembering. Lilia lay on the narrow guest bed, staring at the ceiling, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. But sleep didn't come easy. When it finally did, it brought nightmares. She woke with a gasp, heart pounding, hands clenched in the sheets. The room was still dark, the silence thick. For a long time she sat upright, legs pulled to her chest, trying to remember where she was and that she was safe. The next morning, her eyes were swollen, and she barely touched the bread Johann set on the table. He didn't press. He poured tea, sliced apples, and spoke only about the weather. Later, while tying branches in the orchard, Lilia broke the silence. "I didn't always live with that man," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on a knot in the tree bark. "Before that, I was in 8 different homes." Johann didn't stop working. He waited. They passed me around like something borrowed. Some were kind. Most were not. I stopped unpacking my things after the 5th. Still he said nothing. Once, one man locked the fridge at night. Said food was for people who earned it. She exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. "I don't know why I'm telling you." Johann looked at her then, not with pity, but with a stillness that carried weight. "Because no one ever really asked," he said, "and you've carried it too long." Lilia's throat tightened. "Sometimes I think I'm broken, like maybe I'm just too much trouble to keep." He set down his tools and came to stand beside her. Not too close, not invading, just near enough to be steady. "You're not a problem," he said gently. "You're a person." That was all. No dramatic speech. No promises. Just a sentence she didn't know she had needed so badly to hear. Lilia blinked, looked away, then back again. "You're the first person who's ever said that," she whispered. He gave a slow nod. "Then it's about time someone did." A breeze rustled through the orchard, scattering leaves around their feet. Lilia's eyes followed them, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like something drifting. She felt seen. The attic smelled like dust and dried herbs. Sunlight filtered through the small, round window, painting golden circles on the wooden floor. Lilia had gone up looking for more blankets, but what she found instead was a typewriter. It sat beneath an old canvas sheet, its metal frame tarnished but intact. She lifted the cover gently, brushing away cobwebs. The keys were faded, some stuck, but something about it pulled her in, like a relic from another life, waiting for hers to begin. "Does it still work?" she asked later, carrying it carefully into the kitchen. Johann looked up from peeling apples. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Haven't seen that thing in years," he said. "Used to belong to Marta. She wrote everything, lists, letters, stories, even labeled the trees with poems once." Lilia smiled, imagining that. "Can you show me?" He set the knife down and wiped his hands on a cloth. Together, they cleared a space on the table. He loaded in a yellowed sheet of paper and adjusted the ribbon. The first few strokes came with effort, but soon the machine began to clack softly, like it remembered. Lilia stared at the blank page. "What should I write?" "Write to yourself," Johann said. "The one you'll be 5 years from now." She hesitated, then began typing. "Dear future me, I hope you sleep without waking. I hope your hands are warm. I hope you stayed." She didn't finish the sentence, but she smiled just a little. Over the next few days, she returned to the typewriter often. Not always to write full letters, sometimes just words or phrases or dreams. She started keeping them in a small tin box beside her bed. Meanwhile, Johann brought out a forgotten project from the barn, an old apple press, rusted and leaning. Together they sanded the wood, oiled the hinges, replaced a broken crank. Lilia's hands became stronger, her movements surer. On Sunday, she decided to bake. "I've never made bread," she admitted, reading from one of Marta's faded recipe cards. Johann leaned on the counter, watching her fumble with flour and apples. The dough stuck to her fingers, the oven creaked, the crust burned just slightly, but when the warm scent filled the kitchen, she laughed. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. Not a polite one, Ariel caught off-guard laugh. He didn't say anything, just smiled and sliced another apple. Outside, the trees were already preparing for winter. But inside, something had begun to bloom. The snow came early that year, soft and slow, covering the rooftops like a secret being kept. Lilia had begun walking into town alone now, sometimes to fetch eggs, sometimes just to feel what it meant to move freely. No one had told her she couldn't, but freedom, she was learning, didn't always feel safe. At the bakery, she stood in line behind two women wrapped in thick scarves. They didn't notice her at first. Then one leaned into the other. "You've heard, haven't you? The old man out by the orchard. He's taken in a girl. Foreign, half his age." The other snorted. "Some say she just appeared. No family, no past, and now she's baking bread in his kitchen." Laughter. "I wonder what kind of work she's really doing." Lilia's heart sank. She lowered her head and left without the bread. The cold stung her face as she walked back, her steps quickening. Each crunch of snow under her boots echoed louder than the last. She pushed through the orchard gate and went straight inside, not bothering to remove her coat. Johann was peeling apples at the table. She didn't speak, just went to her room and closed the door. An hour passed before she emerged. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and guarded like the first day they met. "I should go," she said. Johann didn't look up. He continued peeling. "Is that what you want?" She hesitated. "No, but I can't have people thinking, saying things. They'll say what they want. That's always been true. I'm not your daughter, not your wife, not even your—" "Lilia," he interrupted softly, "I know who you are." She stood frozen. Somewhere beneath her panic was a small voice, asking, "Is he angry? Is he disappointed?" She didn't hear either. Johann set the apple down. "If you go, I won't stop you. I've never wanted to keep anyone here." He looked at her then. "Calm, steady, but just so you know, my door stays open. Just like your song that day, the one I heard through the window." Her eyes welled. "You remember that? Clear as daylight." She wiped her face, frustrated by the tears. "I hate that they think I don't belong." "You do," Johann said, "and you don't need to prove it to them. You only need to decide if you believe it." Lilia sat down across from him. For a long time, they said nothing. Then she reached for the apple peeler and kept the coat on, just in case. The house was quiet again, not the comfortable, shared kind of quiet that had grown between them over the past weeks, but the old kind. Heavy, hollow, the kind Johann had known too well before Lilia came. Her room was empty. The bed made. No note. No farewell. Just gone. He didn't search. He didn't ask in town. He just moved through the days as if walking through fog. He peeled fewer apples, left the kettle boiling too long, sat by the window in the evenings, and didn't open a book. The chair across from him at breakfast stayed empty. Still, he put a second cup out every morning. Winter deepened. Snow pressed against the window panes, and the orchard slept under a blanket of frost. Johann chopped wood with slower arms. He lit the stove earlier, even though he hardly touched his meals. And then, one morning it was there, fresh bread, still warm, sitting on the table when he came in from the barn. No sound, no footsteps, just the scent, apples and yeast and memory. He turned slowly. Lilia stood in the doorway, coat open, hair dusted with snow. No apology in her eyes, just something firm rooted. "I want to learn how to prune trees," she said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a request. Johann's heart thudded once in his chest. He nodded. "All right," he said. "You'll need gloves, and the small shears." She smiled then, not wide but real. A small corner of her mouth that turned like the edge of spring after a long frost. They didn't talk about the days she was gone. He didn't ask where she'd been, and she didn't offer it. Whatever questions hung in the air were replaced by motion. Her slicing bread, his pouring tea, their movements folding back into rhythm like a song remembered. Later, as they stepped into the orchard with tools in hand, Lilia looked up at the trees, still sleeping. "I miss this," she said. Johann didn't reply. He handed her the shears and gestured to a young tree with wild, reaching branches. "Let's start with this one. It's still finding its shape." Lilia ran her hand gently along the bark. "So am I," she said quietly. And then they began, cutting carefully with soft hands and steady hearts. By March, the snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown earth beneath the trees. The orchard stirred in its sleep, buds tight on branches, sap rising invisibly. Johann said nothing, but he watched closely, like a father waiting for a child to wake. Lilia now moved through the farm as if she had always been there. She rose early, fed the chickens without being asked, and began labeling the younger trees with twine and small wooden tags she carved herself. Some had names, some numbers. A few had words. Patience, storm, begin again. Johann noticed, but didn't interfere. When he showed her how to mend the cracked rain barrel near the barn, she offered a better solution involving rope and an old metal hook. It worked. He nodded, impressed, and wrote it down in a small notebook he kept in his breast pocket. They didn't talk as much as some would expect, but their silence had changed. It no longer weighed between them like an unspoken question. It hummed gently, like the pause in music that makes the next note matter more. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, they would sit on the porch with 2 mugs of tea, watching the light shift across the orchard. Lilia would point out the trees that leaned too far or suggest ideas for new compost beds. Johann would listen, scratch his chin, and say, "Could be worth trying." And now they laughed. Not loudly, not often, but when it happened, it was unguarded, like air let back into a closed room. Once, when a goat knocked over Johann's toolbox, Lilia nearly doubled over, gasping with laughter. Johann didn't scold the goat. He just shook his head and said, "Show off." She smiled for the rest of the day. Healing didn't arrive with a grand speech or a perfect moment. It came in layers, in the rhythm of work, in shared meals, in the steady creak of the porch swing beneath a quiet sky. And Johann, who had once thought his life was winding down, now found himself listening for Lilia's footsteps in the morning. The orchard was not just his anymore, and for the first time, he was glad of it. Spring returned slowly, like a long-awaited letter. The orchard was full of white blossoms now, swaying gently in the breeze. Bees danced from tree to tree. The world, once still and aching, now hummed with quiet life. Johann walked slower these days. His hands ached in the morning, and his back didn't straighten like it used to. But his eyes were clear, and his voice, when he used it, was calm. Lilia stood at the edge of the orchard, a shovel in her hands and dirt on her jeans. In front of her, a young apple sapling had just been planted. Its roots had found home, deep in the soil she had prepared herself. Hanging from a thin branch was a small wooden sign, carefully burned with her name. Lilia. It was the first tree she'd planted alone, the first thing she'd ever truly claimed. Johann approached, nodding at the tree. "Looks good. It'll lean for a while," she said, "but it'll straighten when the roots settle." He smiled. Just like some people, they stood in silence a moment, watching the tree. Later that afternoon, Lilia walked into town, not to disappear, not to hide, but to meet a girl who had just left her foster home. A local counselor had asked for help, and Lilia had said yes. "I don't have answers," she told her, "but I know what it feels like not to be asked anything at all." Now, once a week, she sat with girls like that, not to fix them, just to sit and stay. Back at the farm, Johann waited with tea and an extra plate, as he always did. She came home with a smile and dirt still under her fingernails. The orchard was no longer just trees. It was memory and work and healing stitched into the roots. It was a place where no one had to earn rest. A place that said, "You belong." Have you ever met someone who showed up just when you needed them, quietly, without asking anything in return? Maybe it was a moment, a word, or just a place where you could breathe again. If the story moved you, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. And if you believe in second chances, in quiet kindness, and in the healing power of being seen, back in Index Pointing Right, please like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the smallest stories grow the deepest roots.